Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us from wherever you're joining us. Delighted to welcome you to today's UNU-INWEH Science Talk. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Science Talks are our weekly series which showcases the exciting work of UNU-INWEH researchers. I'm very pleased to share that all of our previous Science Talks from the entire 2024 series, as well as the 2025 series, are available online on demand at our YouTube channel and at our website at unu.edu/INWEH/science-talks with an S. And this is a particularly exciting science talk because Carmen was actually our first external presenter in the previous round, hosted by Professor Grace Oluwasanya. And you can view that science talk on our YouTube channel or on our website. Today's talk, like all others, will be recorded, and the recording will be made available on our channel following the talk. We'll also conclude with an interactive question and answer session, so please use the Q&A box to put your questions in. You don't need to wait until the last minute. I will make sure to read out your questions to our speaker. The topic of today's talk is climate change, extreme weather events, and sexual health, case studies from Uganda and Kenya. And I'm very delighted to introduce our speaker, Professor Carmen Logie, who is the Canada Research Chair in Global Health, Equity, and Social Justice with Marginalized Populations, and Professor at the Factor INWEH Faculty of Social Work at the University of Toronto. Dr. Logie's research program advances the understanding of and interventions to address stigma and other social and ecological factors associated with health disparities. She's particularly interested in understanding and addressing the convergence of intersectional stigma and other social inequities, including food, housing, and water insecurity, and their impacts on sexual, reproductive, and mental health. She also has a podcast, Everybody Hates Me, Let's Talk About Stigma, which invites a range of weekly guests to talk about all different kinds of stigma. I highly recommend it. Her current research focus is on HIV and STI prevention, testing and care cascades in Canada, Uganda, Brazil, and Jamaica with people living with HIV, refugees and other displaced youth, LGBT communities, Indigenous youths, and persons at the intersection of these identities. She collaborates with the World Health Organization and was a guideline development member for the WHO Consolidated Guidelines on Self-Care Interventions for Health, Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights. She also collaborates with the Canadian Public Health Association and the U.S. National Institutes of Health on stigma-related research, policy, and guidelines. Here at UNU-INWEH, Dr. Logie contributes to water-related health risks and pools development research. And with that, without further ado, I am delighted to turn it over to you, Dr. Logie.
Thank you so much. And I need to update a little bit my bio because I'm no longer working in Brazil, but hopefully again in Jamaica, but now working in Tanzania and Kenya as well. So thank you so much for having me here. And yeah, I know I have about 40 minutes, so I'll just start right now. I just want to also acknowledge both the land that I'm on, which is a land of many indigenous peoples, but also that there's indigenous peoples in all of the lands that we are working on who are disproportionately, particularly in Kenya, impacted by drought and the impacts of climate change. I also want to acknowledge in the last slide, we'll have the huge list of co-applicants, team members, research coordinators, uh, data collectors, participants. So there's a huge teams, big teams behind this work. I just want to acknowledge them as well as the funders. So let me see how this works. Okay, great. So in my brief time today, I'll be providing a little bit of the background about what I'm talking about, two case examples and ways forward. It's going to be a high-level overview, and I've included a lot of links and examples of our publications if you want to go more in depth. And so people all the time ask me, why do you study climate change and sexual and reproductive health? However, it is becoming a lot more popular to be doing this. Uh, and this picture was sent to me by our colleagues in Bidi Bidi Refugee Settlement in a WhatsApp group chat. And they're saying the water scarcity is really getting bad. And when I started working here in 2019, you would see people lined up to get water at the water taps. And the last few years that I've been going, there's no longer daily water access. And so what you see instead of people is you see these long lines of jerry cans. And I don't need to tell you, there are huge proportions of the world's population who have insufficient access to water and sanitation, as well as to food, leading to extraordinarily high rates of water and sanitation insecurity in the billions, and food insecurity in almost 740 million people, probably more than that now. And so for the last few years, my own team, as well as other teams at WHO, we've been looking at what are the pathways between climate change and sexual health, because we know from a lot of retrospective data that increased years of drought are associated with some populations in some contexts, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, with increased HIV acquisition risks. We also know that extreme precipitation um, is also associated with increased risk of HIV acquisition in some countries with some people. We know that could be due to, for instance, structural impacts, health infrastructure damage, community impacts, for instance, migration, forced relocation, interpersonal impacts, such as increased transactional sex for survival, and individual impacts, including mental health, disrupted access to services and information. So there's a lot of multiple complex pathways. And more recently, I was invited to review the last 18 months at the time this was published a few months ago of literature on HIV specifically and climate change and extreme weather events. And so what you can see, and you can see our publication is in the current opinion of infectious disease that just came out pretty recently. We were able, because we focused just on HIV, sort of differentiate the pathways from extreme weather events to both HIV prevention outcomes as well as HIV care outcomes. And a lot of them are similar, but a little bit different than the pathways I just shared with you to sexual health in general. So there's still the structural impacts, but also these multiple co-occurring resource insecurities, as well as migration displacement, as well as individual and interpersonal impacts. And so without further ado, I just wanted to share two case studies. The first one is going to be in Uganda, in Bidi Bidi Refugee Settlement, which is at the border of South Sudan. I've circled it there. All the pictures that you'll see are part of a walk-along interview research project that we have, research ethics board approval, and we have anonymized people's faces. People gave consent for their photos that they took, which I'll be talking about as one of our recently published research articles. And so, to be honest, when people say, why do you even study water? It's actually because of Bidi Bidi. I was in Bidi Bidi Refugee Settlement in a very hot August. If anybody has been to Bidi Bidi in August, you know it's very hot there. And there was like really no water access, and that meant it was very challenging to use the toilets. So I was like personally experiencing this, as well as collecting these stories for a post-rape care and sexual violence prevention study that we did with youth using comics, when a lot of the narratives around why people were experiencing sexual violence, or how they were experiencing sexual violence, I should say, because why is rooted in gender inequities, but how they're experiencing sexual violence was because of lack of resource access, including a lack of access to water, which led people to have to walk further and further, and often at night, often early in the morning before the sun rose, because the lineups for water were so bad. And I know many of you will already be aware of the water shortages, that increased risk of sexual violence. Also, lack of firewood access, especially in the rainy season. And so these are some of these resource access really struck me in this completely sexual health focused study about being these drivers of sexual violence. And when you actually read up on it, there's not a lot of research specifically focusing on adolescents and youth and their experiences of resource insecurity in humanitarian settings related to sexual health. And so, our study was people liked our study. And, we ended up publishing, the one is in the Journal of Water, Sanitation, Hygiene for Development. We looked at these pathways from water insecurity to sexual and gender-based violence. We ended up also doing an HIV self-testing study. But more recently, and what I wanted to talk about today was, and you can see in the top corner, our first article that's published from this study. It's a SSHRC-funded study, a SSHRC Insight Grant, mixed method study. So we also have quantitative findings that are in review and revision, and another couple qualitative articles in review. But what we did was we did one-on-one interviews, and the purpose of this whole study was to look at refugee youth in Bidi Bidi, their experiences of multiple resource insecurities and extreme weather events. So water, food, sanitation, housing insecurity, relationships to extreme weather events and climate change, and then pathways to sexual and reproductive health. We actually got a lot of different health outcomes. So what I'm presenting now is sexual and reproductive health, but if you're interested, we also looked at physical health and mental health, and those are in separate papers. So we did 12 individual interviews with really specifically chosen non-government organizations focusing on water, focusing on climate, as well as refugee organizations, as well as sexual and reproductive health. And we also did individual interviews with 32 refugee youth aged 16 to 24, 16 women, 16 men. And what we did was walk along methods. So the youth took the research assistant to 1 to 3 places where they accessed water, food, and sanitation. And then they used a tablet to take photos, such as the photo I showed earlier. And then in the interview, we looked at why was each place chosen, how the season weather influenced their experience of the place, and how the place impacted their health. And so I'm not going to go into depth about this. You can see our article in Global Public Health that just came out. But this was our findings in a nutshell. So you can see both drought and flooding led to housing, firewood, food, sanitation, and water insecurity. Flooding in part through agricultural damage and damage to roads. Those led to sexual and gender-based violence risks, including early child and forced marriage. Those led to HIV and STI acquisition risks, unplanned pregnancy risks. And we also found overflowing pit latrines led to menstruation management challenges, which led to hygiene and reproductive tract infections. And also these led to missing school, which in and of itself in East and Southern Africa is an HIV risk factor. So those are our findings. Just some examples where participants really clearly described that climate change contributes to water scarcity and extreme heat. I know this might seem obvious to you, but in this current moment in time, and there's a lot of people questioning climate change and defunding climate change, we really wanted to highlight that this is actually coming from people's lived experience. So people talked about the global warming affecting water supply, and then how sometimes in the dry season it's 2 months without any water. And then that there's seasonal changes. So there used to be no rain in June, but now there was rain. So this is affecting the crops. And then drought contributes to these multiple resource scarcities that increase sexual and gender-based violence risks, transactional sex, and menstruation management challenges. So a lot of time, what's happening is food insecurity related transactional sex with the girls, and then that leads to unplanned early pregnancy, which leads to a whole list of poor health and social outcomes for adolescent girls, including forced marriage. And, there's just so much research on this, and the reviewers for our article were like, what is the difference between this and non-refugees? Well, refugees come with a lot less resources and also experience barriers, including language and literacy barriers because of disrupted education, because of different languages, even accessing employment, and they have disrupted social networks. So yes, while all populations will be affected by drought, refugees have additional barriers, and they are already precarious based on leaving a lot of their family and economic and social supports. So they're very precarious already. And so this is an example of one of the youth. They took this photo, which we've anonymized, but says, we come around 1, bringing the jerry cans. If you come around 8, there's just risk for sexual violence. And a young man took this photo and said, in the dry season, the water's not here. Things are hard. And so the third theme we discussed was heavy rains and flooding contribute to multiple resource scarcities that increase sexual and gender-based violence risk and menstruation management. So the previous theme was around drought in the dry season, and this is really about heavy rains. So it's hard to get firewood. It's very bushy, which also increases risks of violence. And a lot of times what's happening is that people are moving into the host national land and experiencing violence, often sexual and gender-based violence, because they're seen as refugees coming into Ugandan territory for firewood. And others talked about, this is an example of a latrine and how the person who took this photo, a young man, just described in the rainy season, the bad thing is it gets filled with water. And so, we created this multi-level recommendations of, what are some of these multi-level recommendations, but also a synopsis across these extreme weather events that are contributing to agricultural and infrastructure damage in the context of socio-political realities where there's insufficient humanitarian funding. We have heard about 15 refugees already this year died by suicide due to starvation. And there's has not been enough food rations for several years from the World Food Program towards refugees in Uganda. And now we're hearing it's less than 40% of people's basic needs. And these are people who are supposed to be protected by UNHCR. So this also, the fact is there's evidence that refugee settlements are built on land that is more exposed to extreme weather events. So you have this deep structural violence if you're putting refugees on land that is more exposed to extreme weather events, yet we're defunding and insufficiently funding access to food and water. And we also, of course, that leads to resource insecurity, household stressors, and individual sexual health impacts. So this was a mixed method study. And so we also did a cohort study with 400 youth. And I'm just presenting one of our findings, which is associations between past year extreme weather event types and frequency with HIV vulnerability outcomes. And so we do see that the increased number of extreme weather events in every year is associated with reduced sexual relationship power and also increased frequency. So this is self-reported. We are going to be also comparing it to the GIS variables that are available, but there actually isn't. We actually have a whole list of extreme weather events, and happy to share more about that later. This paper is currently in revision. Sexual health. We also found that increased number and frequency of extreme weather events was associated with reduced reproductive autonomy and reduced condom self-efficacy. So sexual relationship power, reproductive autonomy, and condom use self-efficacy are really key drivers of HIV vulnerabilities. They're relational level factors that determine if people have even the agency in a relationship to negotiate the use of sexual and reproductive health services and products such as condoms. And this is really understudied. To our knowledge, study is unique in looking at extreme weather events and these relational level HIV vulnerabilities. We also found increased transactional sex associated with the increased number of extreme weather events. We also found increased intimate partner violence and increased multiple sex partners. Those were just associated with the increased number of weather events. And then we also did we've done a lot of analyses, latent class analysis, where we found different categories of people's experiences So we have the people with moderate resource insecurity, high mobility, and high extreme weather event exposure, water insecurity, low mobility, and low extreme weather event exposure, and severe resource insecurity, frequently mobile, and high extreme weather event exposure. And the ones with moderate resource insecurity and higher mobility and higher extreme weather event exposure compared to the group that was less mobile, more and had less extreme weather events, they also reported lower condom efficacy, lower sexual relationship power, and increased odds of intimate partner violence. And one group also experienced lower reproductive autonomy. So it's not just extreme weather events, it's an interaction with the resource insecurities and with mobility, which is in itself an HIV risk factor due to increased sexual networks. So that's just what I just described. So in general, our findings from this case really document the need to look at, frequency and types of extreme weather events, mobility, and multiple resource insecurities. For my next case example, which is my 24 minutes, I'm going to talk about our research with in Kenya with young adolescents in climate affected regions. And so we did a SHIRK partnership development grant funded study in 6 locations in collaboration with 2 Kenyan community-based organizations, Eland Trust and Bidi Refugee Settlement, Isiolo, which is a nomadic and pastoralist communities authority, which is an urban informal settlement in Nairobi, as well as Center for Study of Adolescents in Naivasha, which is flower farming communities, Kilifi, which is coastal farm holders, and Kisumu, which is fishing communities. And our methods are published here in the Journal of Global Health Reports. And basically, we did a lot of data collection, which was quite overwhelming. There's so much data. We did 12 elder focus groups, 2 per site, one for elder women, one for elder men. We did 60 walk-along interviews with youth, so 10 in each site, 5 young girls, 5 young boys. We did 12 participatory mapping workshops, so 2 per site, one with girls, one with boys. We did post-process community dialogues, 1 per site. We did, and then we did a second study with older youth, 16 to 24 actually, with SenseMaker, and then we did participatory video. So I'll see what I can get to in the next 20 minutes, but I did want to show you a couple of videos that we made. So so we're really focusing on making this really exciting for you. So this is some examples of the participatory maps that we made. And at long last, our first publication came with our results in BMJ Global Health a couple weeks ago. Please check that out. It took an entire year and 4 rounds of revision, so I hope you'll like it. So that is about climate change, resource insecurities, and sexual and reproductive health. And, basically describes across our 297 participants who I described as elders, youth, and the youth participatory mapping participants, as well as youth walk-along interviews. I'm not going to go into this, but our key themes were climate change, climate-related changes and extreme weather events increase existing resource insecurities that have both direct and indirect links to sexual and reproductive health. Food and water insecurity contribute to youth missing school, sexual violence, transactional sex, and exploitative relationships. Sanitation insecurity produce menstruation management challenges, sexual violence risks, and transactional sex. And both transactional sex and exploitative relationships were linked with unplanned pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections risks. And there were some gender differences. So gender inequities increased girls' risks for violence and sexual exploitation, whereas boys were more prone to running away in context of resource insecurity. This is our beautiful figure, which is also in the article, showing these pathways. So I'm just going to briefly go over this because you can get it in our article. But climate and extreme weather led to resource scarcity, so it exacerbated this pre-existing scarcity. Extreme heat was another affected drought, and there was really big seasonal differences, and there was these multifocal effects on food insecurity. And no matter where we go, and I'm sure all of you in this field are aware of this, people will tell you water is life. And, people talked about, water is life, but also when there's too much sun, we can't get healthy things. It'll dry up our fruit. But then when there's too much rains, it'll carry our food away and we're left hungry. And then the food scarcity and pathways to sexual and reproductive health, youth described running away from home, sexual and gender-based violence, transactional sex, and then in turn, adolescent pregnancies and STIs. And, when there's no money, people can't go to school. What are they going to do? Sometimes the boys would run away. The girls will skip school and go to someone's house who can give them food, and sometimes even just for 15 cents. Um, and then you see girls getting pregnant very early. And water insecurity also led to educational disruption, sexual violence risks, and all these photos were taken by youth with ethics approval to use the photos. This is in Mathare. And transactional sex. So in addition, heavy rains, elevated sexual violence exposure due to infrastructure damage and changing people's normal routes of walking. I'm just going to kind of go a little bit faster. Sanitation security, so led to menstruation management challenges, sexual and gender-based violence, and transactional sex. And so often those transactional sex related to menstruation, insecurity needs, but also related to soap and water. And I wanted to, on a hopeful note, I hope I could play this video. This is, so as part of our participatory mapping, we actually made songs in every location. My amazing former postdoc, Dr. Sarah Van Borik, is a musician and videographer. I'm showing you the first 2 minutes, but this is available on our website. So please watch the whole 17 minutes, but I'm just going to show you two. Or maybe we could have a screening at UNU-INWEH of the whole thing as well. Hoping the sound will come on soon.
Carmen, is your sound on? We are not hearing we see the video but not hearing the sound.
You didn't hear the sound?
No.
Not this time, no.
Oh, I'm so sad. It was this beautiful song. I don't know how to. Does anybody know how? Unless I stop sharing. Let me see. It says I'm sharing.
Go on because we can't choose.
I don't know how to make the sound go on. I pressed share sound. Oh, okay. Are you guys still here? Okay, I'll try playing that again because it's just a beautiful song. Can you let me know if you don't hear it this time?
Yes. We hear it now.
Okay. Oh, I have to start it again, I think. All right. Let me go back to the beginning. It's worth it. Trust me. It's the kids singing and it's recorded on my iPhone. Hopefully you hear it this time. I'll tell you when it's supposed to kick in. Can you hear it?
Yeah.
You can hear it?
Ndoto zetu ni muhimu kama watoto. shopkeepers. We want people to be more responsible in marketing. We want our dreams to be fulfilled.
So we actually screened this video at the community dialogues that were led by the youth, the 10 to 14-year-olds who made the video, with a list of their recommendations with community leaders. And actually had some change happen. So we had in Isiolo, they built 2 new toilets. And in Mathare, they had a meeting about how to manage cleaning the toilets, the garbage disposals, because this is a big issue with regards to menstruation management supplies. And we just found out oh no, it's embargoed. I can't tell you any good news. There's no good news at all that I found out last week. So you have to keep stay tuned, because I can't tell you good news. It's embargoed. Anyways, so what we did after that was we worked with 16 to 24-year-olds, and we shared photos taken by the youth in sense maker workshops, and which sense maker is this mixed methods way of collecting data. And then those photos that the first group of young adolescents took and the narratives from the sense maker with 16 to 24 years were then used to create digital stories. And the first paper from that just came out a couple weeks ago. Basically, we had like 3 papers come out 1 week after a year of waiting, as you're all aware of. But this one, we really focused on the experiences of young sex workers and sexually diverse young men in Nairobi. And this paper includes the digital storytelling findings as well as the sense maker findings. So similarly, and there's some differences to the last models I showed you, but we found that drought and flooding both resulted in resource insecurities, water, food, sanitation, and housing. And flooding also led to infrastructure damage, to homes, to rivers, and the quality of water, and to walkways. Those changed water access and availability, both increasing travel distances, increasing rations, changes in food access, and loss of shelter and community spaces. So just to say, sex workers and LGBTQ people are completely understudied in climate change and health research. Yet they experience social and health disparities that are already leading them in contexts such as, I'd say every context in the world, there's stigma discrimination, but in other contexts such as Kenya and Uganda, where this criminalization, it's a whole other level of precarity. And so these changes in water access, food, and shelter access increase LGBTQ stigma, fetching water, increase sexual violence risks, fetching water, increase transactional sex to access food, water, and shelter, and that reduces safer sex efficacy, and also people have reported increased sexual violence risk searching for shelter. And I do have a brief digital story. Can someone tell me if you cannot hear it? Hopefully I've now unlocked the share sound. Let me just see. It doesn't really let me, okay, I'm gonna try.
It was one night when me and my family were preparing to sleep and it started raining. We had the rain because our house is made of iron sheet. Me and my siblings were normally sleeping on the floor because our bed was broken from floods. It rained so heavily that the water started flowing inside our house. The water started destroying all of our properties like the food, books, clothes, bedding, and cookers. We were so scared. It was midnight and our house was still full of water and it kept increasing. We started thinking of what we could do that night and we didn't have anyone around to help because our parent had traveled to our rural home. We decided to get help from one of our neighbors. Me and my 5 siblings started the journey to his place. When we got there, we found the neighbor alone and he welcomed us. He guided us on where to sleep. The place where my siblings were sleeping was full, so he suggested I sleep on the sofa. Little did I know that the neighbor had bad intention towards me. He came closer and started touching me, and when I refused, he threatened me. He threatened to kill me with a knife which he was holding, so I decided to cooperate because I was scared, and he raped me. I was in a lot of pain. I was scared because it was unprotected sex. I didn't know where to get help. I was young, 15 years. I was so scared to share about what happened that night, so I decided to keep quiet for 5 days. I started noticing that I had bad smell and some discharge. One of the community health volunteers noticed that I was not well and decided to consult me and took me to the hospital. I got treated and was guided and decided to speak out on what happened. I was infected and the neighbor had already disappeared. After sharing my story, our community started cleaning the drainage and trenches so that when it rains, it doesn't flow into the houses. The community also helped in raising the foundation of the houses to high level. One of the members from the community shared with the government, and they helped in building good drainage, trenches, and planting of trees. The government also opened a facility where young girls are able to express what they are going through about sexual assault. Our community rejoiced because there were no more floods and there was good drainage and trees. I joined the youth group and started sharing my experience and helping other girls who were going through the same thing I did.
So that is one of the digital stories. Okay, that was one of the digital stories that we did. We have a paper in press right now at the International Journal of Qualitative Methods on using digital storytelling with youth aged 16 to 24 in Kenya around climate change experiences. So that was an example. If you want to see all of them, please go to our Shine Lab website. They're all posted. If you want to share them, anything, just let me know. I mean, you're welcome to share them, and hopefully our article will be coming out any day now. And so I only have about 8 minutes. So I'm going to just quickly just give you a snapshot of what we're working on right now. We have a CHR-funded cohort study in Nairobi and Kisumu. We just finished the third wave of data collection. And so we're working in Majengo and Mathare, which are informal settlements in Nairobi, and we're working in Kisumu region fishing communities. These both experience extreme weather events, such as heavy rainfall, drought, flooding, heat waves, as well as they are both disproportionately affected by HIV in the context of Kenya's national prevalence rate. And so we did proposive sampling. We have a really specific sample that is experiencing either resource insecurity, such as food, water, and sanitation, and or extreme weather events in the past 14 days, and the HIV vulnerability in the 14 days. And then Kisumu were really interested in, specifically engaging women in the fishing industry, and Nairobi young mothers. This is because both of these groups are really high risk for HIV acquisition in Kenya, and also they're completely missing. There's really all of the studies I mentioned on HIV acquisition risks in the context of climate change and extreme weather events are with adults. And there's no specific studies that are done with 16 to 24-year-old adolescent girls and young women who are at disproportionate risk for HIV acquisition due to a range of factors in East and Southern Africa. So, and then these subgroups of girls are even more at risk and more likely to be affected by increased resource insecurities. So we're trying to get this multiple marginalities reflected in, and also look at what are protective factors. And so I'm just presenting one snapshot of our findings. We had 597 participants, and a snapshot of our findings are sanitation and water insecurity were associated with increased transactional sex. Extreme weather events and eco-anxiety are associated with increased intimate partner violence odds, and then food and sanitation security and extreme weather events were associated with reduced sexual relationship power, and sanitation security and extreme weather event frequency were associated with reduced pre-exposure prophylaxis access, and water insecurity with increased pre-exposure prophylaxis awareness, and sanitation and extreme weather events were associated with increased PrEP acceptability. So that was a lot to take in. But just generally, we're seeing, that while there are some demographic factors associated with transactional sex, such as being a young parent, casually dating, we are seeing water and sanitation security in multivariable analysis. And then, you know, it's probably hard for you to see this on the screen, but with the PrEP awareness is actually lower for frequency of extreme weather events, um, higher for water insecurity and lower for sanitation security. So we really need to think about what that means. And then when PrEP acceptability is actually higher among people exposed to extreme weather events and exposed to sanitation security, and then reduced sexual relationship power with food and sanitation security, increased IPV with the increased number of weather events. And also sexual relationship power is reduced with the increased number of weather events. So this is currently in revision right now. In my last few minutes, so to sum up that last snapshot of findings, you know, we found sociodemographic, weather, and resource insecurity related factors associated with these relational level vulnerabilities, such as sexual relationship power, as well as lower biomedical prevention awareness, so PrEP. Yet, extreme weather event exposure and resource insecurities are also linked with increased willingness to take PrEP, which might mean increased awareness of one's risk. So there is this opportunity to engage climate-affected young women in HIV prevention. I would just say the biggest caveat is that their USAID and PEPFAR have cut access to PrEP for adolescent girls and young women. So really not sure where we're going to go with this research when it comes to climate-informed HIV prevention. Yeah, so PrEP is understudied, but it's also now not being funded for adolescent girls and young women. So it's a huge political moment right now. So we do need to look at multiple extreme weather event types and frequencies to look at this cumulative exposure to extreme weather event, and also multiple types of resource insecurities. In the HIV world, mainly people have been looking at food insecurity. So we also need to look at water and sanitation. And so just my last couple of minutes, we're also looking at urinary tract infection, bacterial vaginosis, and schistosomiasis self-reported symptoms. We'd love to get more funding. Anybody here's a funder, you can give us some funding to do the testing and clinic validation. But we find that 42% reported symptoms of UTIs, 45% symptoms consistent with bacterial vaginosis, and 11% schistosomiasis. And those were associated with where your latrine is located, HIV vulnerability, such as transactional sex and mobility, extreme weather events, and water, food, and sanitation insecurity. And so just a way forward, we want to think about what could climate-informed youth, sexual, and reproductive health approaches look like. It's very similar pathways from water, food, sanitation, and menstruation insecurity to sexual and reproductive health. And what could this look like if we were to design a sexual and reproductive health, either tailored by extreme weather event or tailored by season? How might we consider integrating early warning systems with sexual and reproductive health and rights promotion? How can we really think about gender transformative disaster preparedness? And thinking about the work that the World Health Organization is doing on self-care for sexual and reproductive health, what are some opportunities for intervention, either youth clinics, peer outreach, schools, drop-in centers? And if you're interested more on our guideline work, we have updated guidelines as well as these guidelines around self-management, testing, and awareness. And while there wasn't a lot of opportunity in this talk today to really talk about strengths, this is something that we are also focusing on, which is the concept of flourishing. What does it mean to live a good life for everybody in our studies? What does disaster resilience look like from a multi-level perspective? There's some interesting multi-systemic resilience work going on that looks at ecological resilience, community resilience, individual resilience. And what about sexual health and well-being beyond risk and disease? So sexual respect, safety, self-esteem, and determination. And this is some ideas we have for interventions if anybody wants to collaborate with me. And closing thoughts, look at a lot of climate issues, not just one. across a lot of sexual and reproductive health issues. Look at how these existing inequities, power, gender norms are amplified by climate change. So climate change doesn't cause sexual and gender-based violence. Inequitable gender norms causes that, but it amplifies them. And what could it look like if we were to do climate-proof sexual and reproductive health programming? There's like so many people to acknowledge, the Ugandan team, the Kenyan team, University of Toronto team, CHR, SHIRK, artists, our website. So thanks to everybody. I hope I can stop sharing now. Okay. Is that okay? I did that very fast.
So much. Yeah, it's clear. I think we'll have to have, we could have had you for several hours and still only scratch the surface. It's clear that you and your lab and your wide group of collaborators are doing some really important work. So thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. I think it's obvious that this is really critical, and I appreciate also the deep emotion and sensitivity that you bring to this work through uplifting youth voices and a creative way of sharing this data. So thank you so much for sharing your very important work with us.
Thanks for having me.
And we'd love to have you back as well for a full screening of the video as well. So we look forward to having you at our conferences.
Great.
There are some questions in the chat, so I'll just pass it over to Dr. Ramchandani.
Thanks so much, Carmen. That was fantastic. Really, really interesting. I was wondering, some of my research has looked at the role of like value chains and supply chains in product access. I'm wondering if any of your research or other research you're familiar with has looked at the role of extreme weather events or climate change on supply chains for SRHR products or otherwise. And, I know after COVID, there's been this big move to look at kind of regional manufacturing and kind of diversification of supply chains, and just kind of how that interfaces with supply chains in the climate space.
There's a great researcher in the special issue on the current opinion in infectious disease that I did, the one on climate and HIV. His name is Collins Awuji, IWUJI, does a lot of really great work on actual HIV care. And he talks a lot about the supply chain disruptions to actually the health system infrastructure. So the same, I can send you the link, but the last name is Awuji, and he's a great researcher that really focuses a lot on that health infrastructure disruptions in extreme weather events related to HIV. There's another researcher called Kingsley Orievulu, or I think it's Orievulu. I know these people just from reading their work. I met Collins, but they also look a lot on that the HIV care disruption through some supply chain. I can say in general, in the refugee space and the humanitarian space, there is supply chain disruptions already. So when I've been to Bidi Bidi, there is often, and youth will tell us this, there's supply chain disruptions regarding ASA HIV tests, just general tests, just a general HIV test. And that, so anything that's climate related will be exacerbating that. But in our global public health article that just came out, they talked about food disruptions. So when a lot of people, and this is something that I really, I'm really passionate about, is the fact that we're building refugee settlements in climate exposed, extreme weather exposed land. And this is published, by folks in PNAS Journal and others. But then we're not taking care of people, and they clearly are being affected by extreme weather events because we're putting them in places that are exposed. But what's happening is a lot of times the bridges, and especially mainly during flooding or heavy rains, they can't get the trucks in with the food supplies, and so people aren't able to eat. So it's really like a call to action to anybody listening. We really need to think about food security right now. And there's so many humanitarian crises going on, but I think like there's been maybe less focus on countries like Uganda, which is the largest refugee hosting nation in Africa, and how a low income country that is actually getting this huge influx still of refugees now, again from South Sudan, that is experiencing like major food insecurity. I don't see a lot of like focus on that. So the supply chain issues I've heard about have largely been around HIV tests and um, uh, food, but since the USAID cuts, it's been really drastic. Every HIV clinic has been closed in Uganda, and all the proper access is stopped in Kenya to anybody except for a pregnant woman. So it's been it's really a crisis.
Thank you.
Also because of the PEPFAR and USAID rules that no country in Africa receiving PEPFAR and USAID money could produce their own antiretroviral therapies. So it's really I think South Africa is. I was just in Morocco at the AIDS Impact Conference, and I think South Africa is producing generic antiretroviral therapy. But there's a real need to invest in that supply chain coming from within Africa. Even when it came to the COVID vaccines, they were reliant on importing COVID vaccines from India and from China and from Canada. So there really could be a lot more investment in like the supply chain products, whatever it is that's needed, being produced closer to where people are living.
Thanks.
Also have a couple of questions. Federico says, thank you so much. Climate change is not gender neutral, and is also asking how, if it's possible to get a copy of the presentation. I remind our audience that the recording will be available, and we can also direct attendees to your website, to the Shine Lab. And if you are happy to share the presentation, we can also make that available as well.
Not yet, because I mean you can share it online, but because the work is in revision right now for 2 of the analyses, I'd prefer not sharing the presentation till it's published. But all of you can see the presentation online and all of our published work. It's just, you know how it is, you don't want to share some analyses that are gonna be redone, or so yeah, so happy to, you can see all of our publications, our website, and this talk is available, but I wouldn't share the slides right now because a lot of what I was doing was just sharing you brand new work. So hopefully that's okay. Hopefully there's enough there for you. There's a lot you can share. There's digital stories, there's video, there's a lot of publication.
Forward to another update when the new research is published. You also have a question from Anna Pilgrim, who says, thank you for a great talk. I was wondering whether you could speak more about the dynamic of the family in relation to transactional sex. For example, in exchange for resources on behalf of children, or an earlier child marriage.
Yeah, it's it's very complicated, and you don't want to create negative perceptions towards people who are in the most desperate circumstances. But across every context I've worked in, anywhere, sometimes there is really a lot of pressure for to get resources in context of resource insecurity and no other social assistance. So no matter where it is, from whether it was in post-earthquake Haiti to, other kind of disaster or conflict or disaster affected contexts, you will see that young girls and women are often um, either exchanging sex for food for their families, um, sometimes being pressured to do that, sometimes just doing that to take care of their family. But in every country that that where people are in these desperate situations, it might seem like, and some of the quotes, if you look at our global public health article, are families saying, "I can't feed you, so you should just probably get married so somebody could take care of you." So parents could also be thinking this is a way that their child could be taken care of by somebody else when they have insufficient food. So I think it's a combination of this desperate poverty, which is being exacerbated by so many crises, as polycrises right now of conflict and climate, and the global aid shrinking. So we do see that. I mean, because of sexual violence stigma, this is something also we published on, is that and this is why we really need to be reducing sexual violence stigma and gender inequities. But often when girls or young women are raped, they're forced to marry their rapist. And that's still unfortunately common in this refugee context where we're working in. So we're trying to work with, I mean, this is all, everything, culture is not static, it's always evolving and things are changing. But it does seem to be that gender inequities are amplified in contexts where there's severe food shortage. And so we are, we're seeing that. And there's also increased sexual and gender-based violence due to increased, you'll find this everywhere in the world where there's poverty, like really intense poverty, there's more stress, when there's conflict, and in weather events, there's stress, and that is often leads to increased intimate partner violence generally. So I think we really need this gender transformative lens to all of the climate work in a meaningful way, and to actually invest in transforming gender norms just as much as we invest in measuring extreme weather events. We also need to invest in making sure that we're transforming the world so that it's more equitable.
All right. Carmen, actually, I was very excited and I joined I was even saying, Carmen, hi, but right now I feel so depressed. And those around me, we know that I have been restless for, the middle of the talk. Now, my issue to you right now is I want to miraculously transition you to the Kenyan president right now. So given all you have seen, all you've known, all your work, so if you happen to be the president for one day, where do you start from?
I would start from what my colleagues on the ground are saying, which like my Kenyan colleagues, which are, they want Kenya to fund the HIV response. They want PrEP to be funded by the Kenyan government. They want the HIV clinics to be funded. And so I would say, this is an opportunity to step in, and we can't talk about climate or weather or HIV without talking about the huge disruptions to the global aid situation right now. So they would say we need you to invest in gender and sexual and reproductive health work now that there's less aid coming in. We need more local ownership. And so my colleagues on the ground are excited about this opportunity, but the government also has this great opportunity to increase their leadership. So I would say keep funding the work. Like even in our survey, we asked people in like just a few weeks ago, open-ended, what recommendations they have. And they're like, can you keep funding the programs that were being funded? Like the adolescent girls and young women are noticing the disruptions to what is being funded for their own sexual and reproductive health and rights, and like 16 to 24-year-olds. So everybody is feeling it. And so to really like think about the most marginalized people, and also like decriminalize homosexuality, because we have a study on extreme weather events and LGBTQ folks in Kenya, and it's been really challenging because of all the disruptions to their basic infrastructure and funding, which is through USAID. So I would say this is the moment to center equity and fund the local response. You can do it. There's a brilliant people. I work with them. I can give you their names, give them funds. Give them funds. That's what I would say. It's really at this moment we need to like I don't know. It's a very weird moment to be an HIV researcher on climate change. I just have to say that. So
Thank you, Carmen. So what I hear fundamentally is money, is fun.
yeah, I mean,
In other
my
words, economic change the economic condition, wealth creation. We're working on we're in the midst of writing a work where we found this strong correlation, and I also took a moment back to just reflect, that we are doing a lot as scientists, but really we need solutions, we need interventions that are relatable, that make sense, that can change things, because it's really so depressing. So it's interesting hearing it from you again, money, wealth. So maybe we should also flip the direction into, we create wealth creation. So with the youth, with the women, with the girls, wealth creation, anything to fast track wealth creation, skill acquisition, anything in that space, because it just seems that's the fundamental place to start for all these, depressing side stories.
yeah, I agree. And also this local ownership of the supply chain, what's needed. Like I think it's a time to reimagine what is possible and what is sustainable, what can be ground up now, rather than imported and top down. What are the local solutions? And there are so many. We're working on a new paper. Um, that is just the youth recommendations for water insecurity, food and sanitation insecurity. And I made them differentiate that into what do you want the government to do? What can your community do? What can your household do? And what can you do? Because I think a lot of times we want the government to do everything everywhere in the world, but it's not going to happen anywhere. The government's not going to do everything. So let's think about what is possible with the resources we have. So I'm really excited about that paper too, because I think it's also about that local ownership. Yeah, so I agree. We need to address poverty, deep poverty, and we need to address sort of like sustainability. So thank you so much. I love the passion. I'm like, yes. Thanks for the opportunity to talk with you.
So much. I think it's obvious that we have to have you back again. I think you really inspired a lot of people. There are a lot more questions that unfortunately we don't have time to get to. I'll make sure to send them to you. We look forward to having you in person. We all really appreciate your work, and I'll pass it to our director to close out.
Because we're over time, I'm not going to take, this was an interesting end. I think this is fascinating, and the narrative and discourse become very important. And I think a good exchange between the global South and global North scientists can be extremely helpful. I think this is a big problem on our side, sitting on this side of the planet, and sometimes even picking up a romantic view of reality, and then that affects our narrative. So sometimes our goodwill is being affected by this, because we cannot deliver for something that is, as you say, sensible, or something that means an intervention. So we even don't have a clear intervention in mind. So it's extremely helpful, and thank you so much for working with us closely and being a great advocate for the right things that humanity should care about. These are very hard for everyone in this business, for those who I think promote the right values and ask for the right things. It's important to remain hopeful and strong and stick to science and research, because this is a very strong, I would say, sometimes I have a hesitation to call it a weapon, but a weapon really to defend and protect. And I think this is something that brings us together. And thank you so much, Carmen. You do a great work. And it's again, you're an example of a person who uses the tool of science to promote the right things and advocate for the right values.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And congratulations on the embargo news.
Yeah. I almost ruined it. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, and we can't wait to visit you too. So our whole team will come up. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And see you soon in Richmond.
Yeah.
Take care.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks
Bring
a
in a
lot.
bunch of people. Thanks, Al.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right.